No, I think no. They beat Pittsburgh or something.
Yeah. Well, Pittsburgh always not games. Yeah. Pittsburgh's not going to lose to everyone. Yeah. Is Judy going back to Pittsburgh?
Ah. So I have to give you your review list for the test. I know I spread all my desks out for the, I did not want plexiglass. But you guys want it. So just sit wherever, and then we'll figure it out when everyone comes next week. I don't know exactly what's going to happen next week. I'm sure it'll be stuff. Give me 1 sec. Okay, I like William Blake. We'll have to spend a day looking at romantic art and see if some of his very kind, a little creepy paintings. So yes, the room has changed. Have you been in rooms with the plexiglass? Do you like it? That's so bad. Going to Mr. Mahalich's room. Mr. Larson and he didn't have enough students, so he was good. My room is big enough. So my AP classes are really big.
Are they?
Yeah. But I've got 3 of them. Kind of small. Mr. Hansen, look, I'd say about 3/4 of the teachers have plexiglass. Do you like them? I like it. If there's in front, all you see is who's watching over.
I know, I was looking around, I was like,
and then the edge is like a real barrier to see, you know, it's like, and then the thing is, they only go to so it does. What's the point of it? Now, no, part of the reason they do it is for contact tracing. So if there's only a small group, but I'm just glad I don't have to. And the more janitors got to clean around this thing. That's, they're already understaffed and, overworked, and then, okay, so we're gonna do a little bit of scientific revolution. I was gonna do a quiz today, but I decided to change my mind. I'm gonna add that 17.4 to it, because it's a short chapter, and I'm gonna make the quiz. I think I'll drop it tomorrow online on Tuesday. The review list, I didn't get it finished. I thought I was gonna, but I got busy doing other stuff. I ended up talking to my nephew in Ohio for like 3 hours. So that's what I did. He's going to Ohio State. And they're just doing everything online, and he's locked in his dorm. He has like a suite, but it's just like a big room and only him and another person. He said, I'm really lonely, so I went to that. It's like one thing, you're in college, like I have all these people around, and he's going to college during COVID. So I talked to him for a while, so I did not do really anything. But he is going to a year semester abroad in Spain. So that's pretty cool. So for spring break, I'm sure we're going to visit. You can choose to go to Spain, but even got to take advantage of those things. It's a lot cheaper to fly then. If we can fly, I'm hoping. The vaccines are coming. I'm getting mine tomorrow. Teachers are they finally allow me. That's on the federal, state, no. But the federal government, they go through the certain pharmacies, and this is the Biden administration and executive order that the federal government and pharmacies teach. That's I kind of want to get it before next week. I know you guys understand too, but I'm old, right? Thank you. See, you shake your head like, yeah, we didn't suck up. You're going to go far in life. All right, so a couple things about the Enlightenment. I really like the Enlightenment. I like the scientific revolution. I think I got to just a little bit yesterday. I was going to the video, and on Friday I did, Peter the Great, and I love Peter the Great. And here's William Blake's Newton. By the way, it's man in nature. And look at nature, the color you can't really see. It's good for the regular heart, really. If you're out there painting it really vibrant. But then here's, Newton, so the math for the universe, but it's just a small part of the infinite. And where you're still a vulnerable human. Okay, with way too many rib bones. So that's another story. So I think we got right to here. Is this sounding good for
I think we started astronomy.
Oh, good. We did get to astronomy. Good. And the thing is, I'm not going to spend a long time because the day universe changed. That one did such a good job about Kepler, about Newton. But there's just certain things we have to make sure we get to. And that's Tycho Brahe. Look carefully at the line in the nose for a silver nose. Okay, so we got right to astronomy. This is right where I quit on Friday. So astronomy. So this goes back to the Greek astronomer Ptolemy, and that here's the Earth, like Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars. But if you think about it, that's kind of the way it looks like. And the Aristotle vision, the Aristotelian view, that a very logical view that everything is on Earth is a straight line, and everything in the heavens is a circle, perfect sphere. And so that was Aristotle. I should add, if you look at this and think, God, what are those people thinking? How dumb could it be to think that the sun revolved around the Earth? Isn't that crazy? Well, first off, yes, they do. Earth was round, all that kind of stuff. But here's the thing about it. If you think we're not very smart and think, well, we know better now, what would it look like if the sun did revolve around the Earth? What would it look like? Exactly the way it looks when the Earth revolves around the sun. So don't forget that. And they were brilliant in other ways. One more person we must add in this real quick. The view, here's the Gregorian calendar. The calendar, the revision in the 15th century, because the Julian calendar was losing approximately a quarter a day every year. And so the calendar was getting really far behind the Julian calendar done during the time of Caesar. And so they did a revision of the calendar. And so they had to figure out the math that worked. And the math didn't work unless the Earth revolved around the sun. And so here's the Gregorian calendar. And that's basically the calendar we're on now. And how do they deal with that losing a quarter day? A leap year. That's why there's a leap year. Orthodox churches like Russia did not do this. So they were way behind. And so For example, in 1917, in the Bolshevik Revolution, which happened according to the Gregorian calendar in November, it happened in October. So it's the October Revolution that happened in November. Just gotta go with it. They would eventually go away from that calendar. So that's what they talk about in the video. Let's get to a couple more things. Copernicus then, he actually, this is a stylized vision of him. He's a monk. And this is his drawing of the sun in the middle. And don't forget the perfect spheres, but the planets orbiting. And they knew all the way to Saturn, and then stars, heavens. And the assumption was they must be revolving around, but they must be very far away, and they spiral because the stars don't move the same way. And then you notice the moon. And so Copernicus, he did not allow this to be published till after he died, for obvious reasons. This went against his church, and it's snowing. Only thing bad about this is it might get really sloppy. But, you know. So that's from Copernicus' view, and I just love the different phases there going around, and the stuff of the face. You gotta love that. So, next we have, also from the video, Tycho Brahe. So, taking that from Copernicus, this is the sextant he used to come up with the angles for the height of the stars he saw. And he spent hours viewing that. This is his journals. He basically accepted the Copernican point of view, even though he didn't want to. In fact, part of the reason he did it was to prove Copernicus wrong. But you can see how they see the mark right here. That's where his nose that was cut off in the duel. And so here's Copernicus with Kepler. But here's a great statue. This is in, I think this is in Prague. And there's Kepler, and there's Brahe looking at the stars. Yes, he was a jerk. I'll be very clear about it. He was a jerk. And then we get to Kepler. And Kepler's one they talk about in the video. And his 3 laws of planetary motion would lay out the mathematical formula for these elliptical orbits. He's the one who figured it out. And with it, he used a very difficult to follow calculus of a bunch of little triangles added up, which is basically calculus, which is basically integration. And this is the exaggerated version of the elliptical orbits, but it was when the Earth would go around here and start picking up speed to try to break away, but then with some reason, they didn't know why yet, would be pulled back towards the sun and be closer, and then try to make the break for it. So it'd be kind of repelled, pulled back in, repelled, pulled back in. And I like this picture of Kepler with the compass. The compass and the straight edge were the most important articles for math. That's how you measured things. Rulers really weren't used yet. So then we get to Galileo. And Galileo, that one we can talk about a good job in the video. So he first off that laws of motion, 32 feet by second. So for every second it goes 32 feet, and it goes up 64 feet per second, and so on. That's per second, it keeps getting faster. And here's Galileo. This is a model of his telescope that's in the museum in Rome. And here, the old idea of dropping things off the tower. He actually used very controlled going down a ramp, but also they drop things off, and this is in Pisa. But the thought was heavier would go faster. No, it doesn't. Heavier does not go faster. They go at the same acceleration. Yes, feathers might appear to go slower, but that's because of air pressure. But also he would use a telescope, and they did a great job talking about the video. He used it to try to speculate on shipping. And he would write the Starry Messenger, where he would say the big thing, the moon's around Jupiter. And that's why he would go to the equal position. He laid out the moon's around Jupiter, and then laid out that, of course, the Bible is wrong. Because he couldn't help it, he's pretty arrogant. That's where there'd be an inquisition. He was almost branded a heretic. He had to quit publishing and be under house arrest. And so It's ironic, the church accepted Copernicus to get the calendar, but then it became a threat. And don't forget, the Reformation was going on, and the Catholic Church could not admit they made a mistake. That gave a great advantage to the Calvinists. Next one we got to get, the Isaac Newton. And they did a good job explaining Newton, but I have to be very clear about Newton. Newton's own quote for how he did it was standing on the shoulders of giants. He knew he did not invent calculus. He used the math of other people, especially Kepler, to come up with his calculus. He used the charts from Tycho Brahe. He used Galileo's laws of motion. He used other people. And this is the important thing about innovation. Innovation just does not happen out of the blue. It's like, oh, innovation. It is almost always built on somebody else. And in the first little bit of inspiration is usually the trigger for much more inspiration. It is part of this process. Nobody is alone. Don't tell the carpets. And so he wrote that Principia right here about mathematics, and that's where he laid out his calculus. Leibniz in Germany might have done the same thing. We're not going to get bogged down in who did what. We're going to go with Newton because we are. Newton had a bigger impact. It's hard, it's hard to deny that. But the theory of gravity. Mathematical reasons for how the universe worked. It blew people away. And this concept that I tried to type this in, and the computer would not let me. It kept putting the word together. I put everybody in and tried to put it together. Every body attracts every other body. So the Earth is attracting us, so we don't fly off into the universe. We are, in a way, attracting the Earth too. Just a tiny little bit, though. It is so small, but just like the moons attract the Earth. And we can see that in a number of different ways, but you can see in what way can you see the moon's gravity on the Earth? Tides. The tides are the moon. And so with that, this is going to come up with this concept of God as the great mathematician, or the most technological piece of machinery in that era, on clock. And so God is like a clockmaker. He created this mathematical brilliance of the universe, where all these mechanisms fit together. And this would form the basis of a kind of religious philosophy of creation called deism. And Newton is going to be one of the most famous people in the world. Newton had a lot of interesting ideas. And some things you would think, God, you still believe that stuff? But don't forget, he's still at a time where there's all kinds of different beliefs, but he set up this idea that we can understand mathematically the universe. Maybe we can manage it, control it. He'd be elected to Parliament. And this is not regular election, remember, just a few elite would come together. And some of these parliamentary districts would make be literally just one house. It was not equal. But he was elected to Parliament. He was in Parliament for a long time, Newton. And he only said 4 words his entire time in Parliament. You want to hear him? Please close the window. So, Newton was not exactly a ball of fire in Parliament. You might have heard that an apple fell on his head and he came up with the theory of gravity. Yeah, maybe, but that's apocryphal. So at St. Paul's Cathedral in New York, St. Paul's Cathedral in London. I got to find that picture. I couldn't find it when I was looking through it. That's what probably have all these pictures. You have just thousands of pictures. St. Paul's was major at this time, and it's like the Cathedral of London. It's like a history of London. All these great figures that have either crypts there, so they're entombed there, or they have monuments to them all over it. It's really like this history of London and of Britain. It's like the British Cathedral. So I was walking, looking at this, and I'm just standing here, walking around it, and I look down, and I'm standing on Sir Isaac Newton. That's where he's in. I was standing on his tomb. Sorry, Isaac, but so what we're coming to is 2 different ideas about ways to look at things and research. One is called empiricism or the inductive method. And this is best done by Sir Francis Bacon. So Bacon's a little bit before that. Bacon was Bacon did research in a monastery. He was looking for the secret history of a number of things. In many ways, you could argue Bacon is the first scientist. I know there are other ones that did it, but Bacon put out together this process where you would see something, come up with a hypothesis. You what that happened. But here's the biggie. Then you experiment. You have experiments. You collect data. And then that will give you a theory. So the big thing is you observe, you experiment, and then come to your theory. So disregard your previous notions. His method of inductive reasoning, which would be inductive as you see and experiment and experience it, would be don't come up with some preconceived notion of the way things are. Disregard your own notions and come in as level-headed as possible. Be as objective as possible, which is really hard to do. But let the data show it, because if you come up with a preconceived notion, that's why he was always scared of the hypothesis. You can engineer the experiment to come up with what you want. Or you can engineer the experiment in such a way that it's so vague, you make up what you want. This has happened so many times in history. In 1912, there's a real search for what's called the missing link. Have you heard of that? The thought was there must be a fossil record of something in between primates and humans. And they're just starting to find fossils because of the Industrial Revolution. And somebody came up with this fossil. And it fit what everyone thought what the missing link was. And they're like, oh, it's a missing link. And they so badly wanted to see it. They did experiments on this fossil with a skull and a jaw. And they so wanted to believe that this was the missing link. That they had all their preconceived notions and they looked at it because that's what they wanted. And if you want something so bad, you turn into it. And it turned out it was called the Piltdown Man. And the Piltdown Man was an obvious forgery. They took the skull of an ape, they put a jaw of a cadaver, they literally just kind of jammed it on there, they painted it with like stained, like furniture to make it look old. They put some chiseled teeth, they literally chiseled teeth, some human and some ape teeth to make it look like an older animal and gave that to them. But it was obviously a thing. But they had their notions and they saw what they wanted to see. So Bacon's trying to tell people not to do that. And we've all done it. If we want to see something so bad, we see it. And so, the other type of reasoning is deductive reasoning. And that's Rene Descartes. And Descartes in Amsterdam, and he really was this idea different than Bacon. Bacon was experimentation, observing. Descartes really wanted to go sit literally in his room and ponder things. Just ponder. The term for this is navel gazing. You know, ponder what's going on and come up with an idea. But this is an important concept too, because you have to think through ideas and then try to see if the world's really like this, especially in things you can't see for yourself. You know, right here in this room here, we can't actually see what it's like in Antarctica per se, but we can envision it and imagine what it was like, come up with some kind of hypothesis. The odds are we would probably be very good, but what the heck, right? So Descartes, he would write the Discourse on Method right here, where he laid out this concept. Where the most important thing is not necessarily observation, it's what we think. But he also laid out that idea, you kind of see what you want to see. And so we must go through our own personal logic and reasoning to come up with something. Which, by the way, doesn't that fit in a way with inductive reasoning? We can only observe so much. Then we have to think it through and think through the process. And this is the deductive method. Thinking through, coming up through logic and reasoning to explain problems, to explain the natural world. But it's different than inductive. It's basically this. You come up with your hypothesis first. Then you observe. And then you come up with your theory, and then you see if the theory works. So inductive, observe, hypothesis, experiment, theory. Here, I think this might happen. Ah, it kind of does. Here's my theory. Let's see if this works. And in it, he laid out then this thought process of how to organize the world within your mind. And this is one of his most famous sayings, I think, therefore I am. And that whole concept was, oh, and add this. This is the definition of humanism. And so he came up with analytical geometry. In fact, when I was in school, it was called Cartesian. I took a class called Cartesian geometry. Geometry, not geometry. From Rene Descartes. Analytical geometry. And this is one of the pictures from him, basically trying to come up with a measurement for the height, basically, of, talking about firing cannonballs. Why is graphing so important? That's a way to take the outside world and then you can put it, you can draw it, you can read it, you can envision it in your mind. You can map it. And one more concept with this then. It's called Cartesian dualism, and so it's kind of funny. Rene Descartes, I took a class also in philosophy, stuff you have to do, and I had geometry and philosophy from Rene Descartes. So he's a pretty broad-minded person, pretty interesting guy. He spent most of his time in bed. He spent most of the time in his bed thinking about things. But the spiritual beliefs, values, that's deductive. And then empirical, like experimentation, math, that's in them. And we are a combination of both of them, and that's the dualism. We're both inductive and deductive. We're both spiritual and empirical. States are spiritual and empirical. And this is going to have a big effect on the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment's going to start. The thought was, we can take the empirical and create societies based upon this. We can come up with the best way to do it mathematically. And then there'll be a pushback saying, no, people are much more complex than this. We have emotions and values and desires that get in the way. And so with that, so this graph, that's Descartes. What you've done, if you ever did that, that's Descartes. He came up with this. And if you like this, good. You can thank Descartes. If you hate it, so you have, if you hate this in calculus, then we have two more people to hate. Isn't that great? So you combine inductive and deductive, and you have the scientific revolution. Or scientific method. The scientific method. It's both. It requires both kinds of thinking. But the most important thing is you need experimentation and data. So inductively, to come up with a theory based upon observation, but also, in case you have an idea of something you can't prove, then you have to go back and find it mathematically, or find it through experimentation. So part of Newton did both. Newton came up with the calculus that worked for the elliptical orbits, but he still had to have, and came up with the theory of gravity, but they needed proof, and the big proof would be a comet coming in. That proved that it worked. And so Newton is a classic example of both inductive and deductive. So here's Francis Bacon being lionized right here. That's why I put them. And this is supposed to represent Descartes' thinking. That's supposed to be Descartes. It's got to be. So we're going to skip this real fast. Don't worry. We're not going to talk about this. So we're going to jump. No. We're skipping stuff. Age of Reason, the Enlightenment. The Age of Reason, the Enlightenment. There's stuff I want to talk about. We have to kind of pick and choose. And one thing to understand about this, there is more observation of the natural world than ever before in this era. They started recording this and writing this down, and we'll get to some of these when we get to Diderot. And this is an important thing about this age of reason. This started to happen where there's more observation of the world around us than ever before, just at a time when the Industrial Revolution is about to hit. When all of a sudden there's going to be more things to see and more ways to see it than ever before. And it will totally change the way people think and lead to a crisis of conscience and a crisis of morality. So let's go ahead and get to that. By the way, that is a salon in France where very wealthy people called philosophes would meet to discuss great events of the day. So, the Enlightenment. So what is it? So here's the thing. Through the scientific revolution, through science and reason, so this is the scientific method, they've come up with natural laws for the way the universe functions. And I put this up here, this is from the encyclopedia, but this is from William Harvey's drawings of the human anatomy. I didn't talk about it in the scientific revolution, I kind of picked and choose, but this real idea that there are natural laws that work. We can control the universe. We understand it. I mean, I should add, we understand it, but Newton also thought the world was 4,413 years old. You know, they didn't know. Other science would build onto that. And what the whole thought was, if we could take the world, but not just the world, how we interact, and bring it out into the cold light of reason. No emotion, reason, logic. Which, by the way, is pretty arrogant. Because what some people might think is reasonable might actually, to other people, be irrational. It really depends on who you are. And so, couldn't we take the scientific method, or try to experiment with human society with the scientific method? Couldn't we try to come up with the way societies function? The way we learn information, the way we teach people, the way we interact, how governments are created and why. Can't we do the same thing? And thus the beginnings of the first social sciences. You're going to have the first real great works of history. And what we would call, in the end of the 19th century, political scientists. We're going to develop government functions. Before they're just still philosophers. And the first, we'll get to them later, but the first of what we would call in the modern world economists, most famously Adam Smith. I mean, there have been philosophers who looked at it before, but we're starting to divvy it out in the way society functions. God, it's going pretty hard. And so, progress. We can come up with natural laws to dictate the progress of humankind. We can actually have set up certain things. If we do these, we can have progress in society. Thus, in the Enlightenment, the thought is we can build a better society. I should add, everybody disagreed what that meant. But still. So as you can see by this, I can move this around and it changes everything. Okay? And so that means education. Yes, urban education, and they built on the backs of the old university system. But if we can educate people to become good educated, thinking members of society, we can make this better world. And lastly, the philosophy of deism, where the God is a creator. God is creator. He's the clockmaker. The God is the clockmaker. And one thing we have to add about this, I didn't say this with Newton, let me say this right here about deism. You might have had this down. The whole thing about deism is this. You think Newton's laws, where God made this giant universe based upon mathematical laws. He came up with the math, put it all together, this precise thing. And it's already this precise universe, all these planets, everything from all the way to a bubbling brook to the sun. It's all ready. And then this is what God did. This is the important thing about deism. And God went, turn it on, and then here's the important thing. Sat back and watched. And that's what you got to get. God created, and then sat back and watched the creation function. That means God is not an interactive God, but it also means who's responsible for us? Me. I am. No. Humans. This is humanism. Deism is a humanistic philosophy. God is built this amazing, nature's God as they call it, the creator. Built this amazing universe and then let us decide. So by definition, add this last part. Deists are not Christians. Or any other major religion, but we're taking the concept of Europe at this time, Christians. Because Christianity has a very interactive God. You know, predestination has God already choosing you for heaven or hell before you're even born. That's about as interactive as you can get. Here, God started and sat back. So humans are in charge. Most of the founding fathers of the United States were deists. They were deists. You know, for example, George Washington never used anything but the Creator. It's always the Creator. And in the U.S. Declaration of Independence, it says nature's God. Nature's God is the God of deism. That's a deist idea. So this is the philosophy. There's going to be a big backlash against this. And so, a couple more things we have to get. First off, Baruch Spinoza. Spinoza was a philosopher of the Enlightenment. He was a deist. And he saw, therefore, then, what is God? If God is the creator. Well, to him, God is nature. God is nature. This amazing world, the flora and fauna, all the brilliance of it, that's God. That's nature's God. And so that's where you hear, you know, like I just said, the Declaration of Independence, nature's God. And so the Enlightenment is breaking out of that. What are they doing to their point of view? They're taking religion out to the cold light of reason. Now, there's going to be some major pushback, even in the second wave of the Enlightenment coming up. So let me get to one more thing and I'll quit. So we got to get to John Locke. John Locke is technically not, just write down John Locke. I'll tell you what you need to know. I put out a bunch of his work. I didn't know what I wanted to tell you. But John Locke is actually right before we would say the Enlightenment. But his thinking had such a big effect on the life. The most important thing he wrote was called the Two Treatises of Government. So do write down the Two Treatises of Government. In your government classes, you might have had to read parts of this. It's really hard to read. And you might notice in the year 1690, he's writing this just after the Glorious Revolution, when William and Mary came to the throne and James II was set on it. But there's John Locke right there, and he really must have been, when he got his portrait painting, a very gaunt-looking man. But let's get to a couple things of his philosophy. There's a statue of him that's in the portrait gallery in London. So the individual must behave as a rational person. I don't know why I put down must and then an arrow. I must have been trying to save space. But they must behave as a rational creature. Humans have rationality. It is the responsibility of humans to behave in a way that's rational and just. Next, what we know of being good, virtuous, and everybody has a different definition of that, but virtue, that's learned. And so he would say that you're born basically as a blank slate. And you learn, and this is imprinted on you through your parents, through how you're brought up, and then it's practiced and modeled. So he did not believe this was hereditary. You're born, and then they can be created. So you can be a good person or a bad person depending upon your upbringing and education. By the way, doesn't that explain then why they thought education was so important? By the way, is this true? Yes and no. You know, it's amazing how much our inheritance, or what we get from our parents, comes through. But at the same time, it's also learned. Also, we possess free will. And this is radical stuff. We make decisions for ourselves. Now, predestination kind of had this and kind of didn't, but this concept of this interactive God decided, and we had no choice over our universe. Oh yeah, we have a choice. And so with that, we must be prepared for freedom. I know that sounds very weird, but here's the reason why I put that there. Most of our lives, we really won't be able to exercise free will, as we are all not doing it right now. You have to sit there, right? Doesn't matter if you like it or not, you have to. I have to do it because it's my job, and I'm made to. If I don't, bad things will happen. See ya. Let's see what happens. It's fun out there also. But it's going to happen the time you have to make choices. It's going to happen. There'll be times when your choices will really matter, will affect everything you do for the rest of your life, and affect other people too, and you have to be prepared for it. And why do you obey? Why are you obedient? Why do you follow my orders and write this down? You do it because of conviction of what you believe. You think it's the right thing to do. You make a series of value judgments. It should not be based upon fear. Because if it's based upon fear and you obey me, what's the first thing you're going to do when I leave? Start breaking stuff. Yeah. Yeah. You do whatever you want. If I rule by fear, which I kind of do, right? You're all scared. But if I walk out, you break stuff. If you're doing it because, okay, he's trying to think of something, I'm learning something here, you're not necessarily breaking things. You're not thinking, that's why I didn't want the plexiglass, because it'd just be chaos. And therefore, if we have free will, and if we make decisions, and we learn this, it means that there's no divine right. Kings, it's not ordained, or just because you inherited vast amounts of wealth, and the most important wealth that he saw was property. That's not divinely ordained. That's through hard work and initiative. That's why he was such a big stickler into property. It's a little more complex. It wasn't all in the Greek. Now, you know why he's saying all this? Because he's trying to support William and Mary becoming king. So you see, James II was not ordained. So he's doing a little bit of, trying to butter up the new monarchs. So divine right is nonsense. Divine right is nonsense. Gee, I wonder what group, and let me throw something out here. Some colonies, like, I don't know, Massachusetts or Virginia or Pennsylvania. You think they might be influenced by this guy? Like a lot? And so let's get to the last part then. Therefore, if we have free will, that means that there are certain rights that are endowed by the Creator to all men. Now, he looked on God, but can't you imagine that when the Enlightenment thinkers start saying this, and it's not necessarily God bestowing rights, this is at creation. The Creator set up a system where all people have rights, which is what it says in the Declaration of Independence, endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. What are these rights? Life, liberty, and property. And that's independence. We control our life. We're not a slave. Free will. And if you have control over your own property and land, you're not a slave. But if any time what you have can be taken away, you're a slave. And at any time, all your valuables, anytime, your most valuable possession, and I can walk up and steal them, and there's nothing you can do, you're not free. Because you must spend every moment of your life sucking up to me, right? If I have that power, now the bell rings. You don't want to get a little, but I think that's fascinating. So we'll have to finish tomorrow in the Enlightenment. do you notice the picture I chose? There's Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Gee, I wonder where Jefferson got that from. Have a good day. I'll see you tomorrow.
Have a good day, Mr. Pritchard. See ya.
See ya. Bye.